You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare.
It's actually a rainy Anzac Day whilst I'm recording this episode, and I couldn't think of anything better to do on Anzac Day, apart from obviously commemorate the day for the sacrifice of our veterans. But I decided to talk about veterans issues. I was recently watching some documentaries on Anzac Day, and I noticed there was a big highlight on war correspondence. In fact, the Australian national identity has been influenced strongly by war correspondence in Gallipoli. G'day listeners, it's your host Mick here and welcome back to the Dead Prussian podcast. Thanks for all your support and reviews on iTunes. Thanks for those people who have been browsing the merchandise store. If you can turn those browsing into purchases, that'd be quite handy for everyone, especially the underwear line that Reece Crawley requested. And one final thing, I appreciate the support everyone's been giving to War for Idiots, the latest show we've released from TDP Studios. Now, my guest today is a war correspondent. It's Sebastian Junger. He's the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Perfect Storm, Fire, A Death in Belmont, War, and Tribe. As an award-winning journalist, a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, and a special correspondent at ABC News, he's covered major international news stories around the world, and he's received both a National Magazine Award and a Peabody Award. Sebastian's also a documentary filmmaker whose debut film, Restrepo, was a feature-length documentary co-directed with Tim Hetherington and was nominated for an Academy Award. It won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Sebastian is currently attending the Tribeca Film Festival to premiere his latest film, Hell on Earth, which is about the Syrian war and the refugee crisis. Now, I've gotten Sebastian to come on the show because I have recently read Tribe, Sebastian's book about war, homecoming and belonging. It was recommended to me by a young veteran named Callum, and as a veteran, I found it quite moving. Sebastian, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, Sebastian, you've spent a large proportion of your life in war zones, covering war and telling the stories of those involved. What got you into this line of work?
I wanted to be a writer and a journalist, and that wasn't working out very well. And I found myself at around 30 years old. I was a climber for tree companies. So if a big tree needed to be taken down in a backyard or over a house, I would go up it with a rope and gear and chainsaw and take it down to pieces. And I got hurt pretty badly doing that, and I started thinking about dangerous jobs.
Yep.
And I eventually sort of thought about war reporting, and I thought, maybe if I go to Bosnia during the Civil War, maybe I can write about war reporters and maybe even learn how to become one. So off I went.
Well, it's quite a switching career path there, from helping lopping down the tops of trees to finding yourself in the middle of a war-torn Balkan state. Now, you're an Oscar-nominated documentary maker, among other things. In fact, you're the first Oscar-nominated guest I've had on the show, hopefully not the last. But what is it that drives you to tell the stories of those experiencing war?
Oh, well, in most of the wars that I've covered, it's a combination of things, and I think I'm pretty typical. On the one hand, I have a sort of basic human empathy and concern for the suffering of others. And as a journalist, I'm in a position to broadcast that suffering across the world, across my country, so that we might do something helpful for that situation. Certainly in Bosnia, for example, the war reporting that showed the suffering of the Bosnians finally triggered a NATO bombardment that brought the war to an end. So that kind of reporting does have a real use. Yeah. But also war is an extremely compelling situation. It's exciting, it's dangerous, it's scary, it's traumatizing. It's filled with sort of big experiences and big emotions. And for some reason, that's very compelling to the human psyche. And finally, I, like most journalists, am ambitious, and frankly, war reporting is a very good way of sort of cutting the line, as it were, in your profession. And within a year or two, I radically changed my level of respect within the field. I mean, in a year or so, I went right to the sort of top of my field because I'd gone to war.
It's interesting. War as a means for, I suppose, career mobility. It's been used for a lot of other career paths, and people probably recognise great military leaders have used war to get themselves ahead, even ancient statesmen. But I don't think too many people have made that connection that you've just pointed out to us about, our general listeners. That it's not just the careers of soldiers that are benefit or influenced by war. Now, I've recently read Tribe, and as I said, I found it to be quite moving and a remarkably insightful book. As a veteran myself, I found it resonated quite heavily. Can you give the listeners a little bit of an understanding about your main point in the book and what motivated you to write it?
When I was young, I had a mentor, an uncle figure named Ellis, who was half Lakota Sioux, half Apache. And I remember him telling me that all throughout the history of the American frontier, white people were always running off to join the Indian tribes, but the Indians never ran off to join the white people. And even when captured by the Indians, white captives adopted into these tribes would often not want to be repatriated, but given the chance.
Yeah.
And I just sort of filed that away. I was fascinated by that. And then, decades later, when I was with American soldiers in eastern Afghanistan, I started encountering this strange phenomenon that American soldiers, veterans who had fought in Afghanistan, often wanted to go back there. They didn't want to go home to America. They wanted to stay in combat in very tough circumstances in Afghanistan. Not all, but enough so that you had to wonder. And I thought about my Uncle Ellis, and I thought, oh my God, what is it about modern society that is so dismal, that's so unappealing, that's so hard to return to? And then I started doing real research into it, and I found that when things are going badly, people in some ways get happier. Mental health improves. During the Blitz in London, admissions to psych wards went down during the bombing. People's mental health improved. So I just had this theory that when we're forced to act collectively and cohesively, mental health gets better. When we're wealthy and safe and protected enough to live individual lives, we actually suffer psychologically.
So I guess it kind of highlights that it's not all doom and gloom, the sense of community that is built, as you said, amongst more tribal communities, and is something you've identified as being found by those experiencing war, either as soldiers or civilians trapped in the crossfire. Can you talk a little bit about these human experiences and what you've observed?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be war. I mean, Peace Corps volunteers, about 25% of them suffer significant depression when they return to America. So, really, the sort of operative idea here is communalism, is people living in close quarters and acting in concert with one another. That obviously is our evolutionary past as a species, as humans. And when that gets recreated by a disaster, by an earthquake, by a flood, by a war, when that gets recreated, it is exceedingly fulfilling and gratifying and meaningful. And people come to actually miss those, quote, terrible days. When things are when things are going badly, humans act well. Humans act their best when they face adversity. When they act badly, it's mostly when their community is not facing a threat, and that's when people can indulge in sort of antisocial behavior.
You also address some of the psychological disorders we see coming out amongst people who go through trauma. You mentioned before that psychiatric wards in the Blitz received less in terms of actual admissions in the UK. How do you see this tribe or community aspect improving the experience of those returning from some of these disasters? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, what seems to be, as one official in London said in amazement, he said, we have chronic neurotics at peacetime driving ambulances. When your people are in a crisis, most people understand that they themselves are needed by their community, by their society. And that allows us to overlook our individual psychological issues. And so there's a kind of relief there. And so the question is, how do you take someone, say a soldier, a veteran, who has experienced that in a platoon in combat, and then bring him home? I keep saying him because the platoon I was with was all men.
Yeah.
Combat infantry, at least in the United States, is all male. So how do you take that veteran who's seen a lot of combat and bring him home and give him a place in society where he's similarly useful and needed and essential and part of a cohesive group? How do you do that? You can't. There are no such things in modern society. They've been lost. And that's why the transition is so difficult, not just for soldiers, but as I said, for Peace Corps volunteers. Even I spoke with one young woman who had cancer, and she survived, but she was on a cancer ward for quite a long time. And she said that after she recovered, after she was released, that she missed being sick because she missed the community that existed on that cancer ward.
It's interesting. It all points towards this sense of community and the building of human bonds and the feeling of being able to support and help one another. And here goes my awkward segue into your latest film, Hell on Earth, which actually seems to comprise quite a bit of this. It's definitely about a specific tragedy. Your film's premiering on the 26th of April, and then will be in late spring in the US on National Geographic. Can you tell us a little bit about Hell on Earth?
Yes, we wanted to make a film about the Syrian civil war, how it started, why it exploded the way it did. The other civil wars of the Arab Spring either resolved or are sort of bubbling away at a much lower level. The Syrian civil war really just exploded. 400,000 people have been killed, millions have been dispossessed, and we wanted to explain how that happened, and also why the Syrian civil war gave rise to ISIS. So our film, Hell on Earth, is a 90-minute explanation of what it's like to be trapped in the Syrian civil war, what it's like to fight in it. We got cameras to many different people in different sectors of the war with different factions. We have a lot of material from ISIS itself, actually. And we follow a family. Our sort of main characters are this family that was surviving. It was living in a town controlled by ISIS. They were living under ISIS, and they self-documented. They had a camera and they documented their own experiences. Yeah. They decided to try to flee, to try to escape, and they managed to escape. They got through an ISIS checkpoint. They managed to escape with their children. They made it to Turkey. They made it onto a rubber raft, headed for Greece, trying to get to Europe, following the stream. I won't tell you how it ends, but they are our main sort of personal characters that we follow throughout the film.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. I can't wait to see it. For my listeners out there, the show's not quite big enough that I get the forward premiere copies yet, but we'll see how we go. Now, yeah. Sebastian, my penultimate question, and penultimate is a word I like to use to confuse my more obtuse listeners. It's about your journey as a war correspondent. As I said, we're focused on some of the issues that you've written about, but the idea of a war correspondent. Now, for some of us that are veterans, the idea of deploying to a battlefield without a weapon is quite alien. You deploy with a camera and a pen and a notebook, probably a laptop these days. So, after so many years of travelling to these dangerous places, collecting the stories of those involved, what is the most important thing that you've learnt about the human experience of war?
Yeah, I mean, I should say that, almost all civilians are weaponless as well. I mean, the wars that I've covered, they're mostly civil wars in Africa and the Middle East. And,
yeah.
They're women, children, old people who also don't have weapons. So as a journalist, I don't feel particularly heroic in that role. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Also, when I was with American soldiers, I was with a heavily armed platoon of U.S. infantry. I mean, I was in a pretty safe, in some ways, I had pretty dangerous company around me. And so I wouldn't have done much with a weapon myself. My job was to shoot video. But Back to your question. It's what I was saying in the beginning, that bad circumstances bring out good behavior, and war is a terrible, terrible circumstance. And as a result, you see some incredibly noble and brave human behavior. Things that, when I've seen things that still years later, when I think about them, they will move me to tears. Not because I'm so sad, but because I'm so sort of awed by the human race and by our capacity for love and generosity and courage. And you just don't, unfortunately, you don't get the chance to see those things or experience them in a, quote, normal, civilized, safe society, the kind of town that I grew up in. I never saw heroism like that. I had to go to a war to see it. And it's probably the most valuable experience I've ever had in my life.
It's interesting that you have to go, to such places sometimes to see the best in humanity, the worst experience people can possibly ever have, and then it brings out the best in them, which all leads back to some of the key points within your book, Tribe, and it's something that has been remarked upon quite a bit. Now, Sebastian, my final question is one I ask of all guests, and as one of our most regular listeners, I'm sure you've heard this all before, but it relates to our mission on the show, to define war in as many ways as possible, just like Big Carl, the dead Prussian, did. Now, I ask each guest to finish a sentence, and this helps us in our understanding of war. But the sentence is war is, and you cannot provide an answer that says war is a great book written by Sebastian Junger. It may be true, but blatant advertising is my role on this show, not yours. So
you read my mind. Damn it.
So I ask you to finish the sentence. War is.
War is at the same time the most ignoble and the most inspiring human circumstance that I've ever witnessed. It brings out the very best and the very worst of people, and it says a lot about the human race that people who have a choice about war often go back to it because there's something in that they need, and honestly, it's something that is arguably good for them.
Now that is an extremely original answer, which is good. It goes to point back of my past guests should listen to this episode and give themselves a rap on the knuckles. War is an ignoble experience that brings out the best in humanity. That's my brief summation. I need to get it into a tweet, so that's what I'll probably use for it. Look, Sebastian, thank you very much for coming on the show. Your books and films have been quite popular here amongst my friends and a lot of the veterans I know, and I'm sure it's the same worldwide. It's important for broader society, and not just veterans, but broader society to understand war. And correspondents such as yourself are the people who are able to bring those stories out of those conflict zones to the men and women who also have a part to play in war, because it doesn't just affect those in war, it affects society and humanity as a whole. So, listeners, you can follow Sebastian on Twitter at Sebastian Junger. You can get his books pretty much anywhere. I was able to take advantage of the audio Kindle combination, which was quite useful. Check out Restrepo. I've found that film on all streaming platforms that we have here in Australia, which is pretty much all the US ones rebadged over here. And keep an eye out for Hell on Earth, because it looks like it's going to be quite a interesting film. And Sebastian, good luck with the film festival, good luck with the premiere, and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
And listeners, make sure you get behind War for Idiots. That's a bit of a lighter look at war. And by lighter look, what I mean is I've got a co-host who actually has better jokes than me. Well, he tells me he's got better jokes than me, but he's not the one getting all the laughs from what I've heard. But until next time, listeners, grab a book and crack on.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter at Dead Prussian Pod, on Facebook at the Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.